Can you make me co-host when you have a chance?
Yep, forgot to do that. Okay, go to participants. Nope. Here we go. Okay, Kevin, you are co-host. All right, thank you everyone for joining the May 14th iteration of the MicroProfile Live Hangout, and I keep forgetting to add the applause track. One of these days I'm going to do that. The meeting minutes, the link to the meeting minutes are in the chat. If you're on this call, please add your name to the list of attendees. And it is everyone's shared responsibility to take notes during the call. If you are not speaking, please be put on mute. We reserve the right, or actually Kevin reserves the right, to basically mute folks. Either Kevin or I, right? We'll mute folks if there's a lot of background noise. So please have your mics on mute if you're not speaking. Okay, let's begin as we normally do with the MicroProfile spec and platform status. So Kevin, you want to lead that one?
Yeah, sure. And it looks like I'm assuming it's Martin that's already updating the status, so that's good. From what I'm hearing from talking with people, we're looking in pretty good shape for the 3.0 platform release. I know I've talked with Andy, and I don't know if Andy's on today. Nope, I had talked with him yesterday. There's a hiccup with the TCK that he's pursuing, but that still looks doable. Looks like Heiko just said that his is done, and the health check is planned for tomorrow. So that looks to be good. The one thing that I do have to ask each of you to do is to update the release page on the Eclipse. I guess it's the Eclipse project page for MicroProfile. And we need an entry for the 3 component releases. I started one for the 3.0 release some time ago, and then I'll update it once we get the other stuff in place. And I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit, John, because it's Emily's item that she put on towards the bottom. There's some release notes that also need to be updated, and especially since we have the breaking API changes this time, we do need to make sure that we have updated those to make people aware that what breaking changes are coming, what could be the impact to their code, so that they know what's going to hit them if they move up to this release. So any questions from anybody on that?
Okay, no questions. I actually have an unrelated question. Can everyone see my screen being shared?
Yes.
Okay, great. Is it moving right now? Is it scrolling?
No.
No, but it's at least full screen here, while for a while you only had a, let's say, quarter of a screen of width, like now.
Okay, let me do one thing here. I apologize, everyone. It doesn't like switching monitors while it's sharing, so that's what's going on. Okay, look okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Scrolling?
There, now it's scrolling.
Yes.
All right. Sorry for interrupting the flow of the meeting here for technical difficulties. Okay. Any other comments on MicroProfile 3.0? So Kevin, what's the release date? And let me know if you need help from anyone on the call. Like I can help review stuff that you've done.
Yeah. So I haven't posted anything yet. The official submission for the MicroProfile review will be next Tuesday, because I need to have the 2 weeks of review period. But the final release doesn't have to be done by then, but I plan to have an RC out with the updates to the specs and stuff, but I need to have the components done before that. So that's why I pushed to get the components done a week before.
All right. Awesome. So you can always ping me to review any changes, kind of like you normally do.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Next topic. Ken, you want to go ahead and lead the discussion?
Yeah. So basically, kind of a follow-on from our talk, I think, last meeting around concerns around the level of async and requiring sync meetings and things like that. So what I'd like to put forward here is a proposal to cease all MicroProfile specification calls completely and move to a completely async model. I do have a couple of caveats there. One is that ideas around maybe the spec coordinator providing a kind of status email to the Google group in the off weeks of the bi-weekly Hangout, just giving details of current issues being discussed, any new issues that might be raised, just because I know not everyone follows the issues on the GitHub repositories. And then obviously a caveat of that a sync call can still happen, that if there's been numerous discussions async and it's not been possible to reach a conclusion, so therefore there's a synchronization required to come to a conclusion. But basically my proposal is to be a complete 180 from where we're at now.
So is a lot of this based on? I'm just looking kind of along the header, right? If you look at all these projects that we have, right? There could be 10 hours of calls a week that an active member of MicroProfile could be on. Is that kind of the concern?
Yeah, and that right now I think it's in the region of 10 to 12. Now, granted, I know health is only every other week now, and I think metrics changed last week to be every other week. But I still think, for the most part, everything that's being discussed in these calls can be done async. And I'd like to try and have us make the calls an exception rather than the rule.
Other folks that attend the spec meetings, do you have thoughts?
Hello, Martin speaking. For instance, for LRA, we are doing always a lot of discussions during these meetings, but we are still under heavy development before final 1.0 release. I guess this is doable for us, but we will still keep weekly cadence at least for some time. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, I think the same is going to be for GraphQL until, I would say, the first version is out. We're still in active development, so the meeting helps a lot. But I agree that for existing just APIs, yeah, that can work.
So that
I guess my one comeback to that would be that if we're saying that these the specs that are currently under development, like LRA and GraphQL, if they can only work with having meetings, then we have a problem, because you should be able to do that work async.
Yeah, sure, I agree. We should be able to do it async, but we're kind of in a rhythm now, so it will. I don't know if it's going to be worth it for us. I think it maybe not immediately. Maybe it's a smooth transition into a more async.
So for metrics, we said we will go to every other week because we don't yet trust, or not everyone trusted, that we can go fully async and only in case of larger issues convene on a call. So I guess we need to learn a little bit more how it's working, and then perhaps spread further out to only have a call once a month or so.
I guess that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to say, I think it just kind of comes down to efficiency, right? It's certainly quicker to have a conversation when you can get answers back from somebody in a few seconds and then move forward than to post something, wait for somebody to check their Gitter or check the email and post back, right? So I think practically speaking, it's helpful to have the meetings, especially when you're on a significant new spec. So in theory, you could do it all completely asynchronously, but in practice, I think it might take a lot longer.
Yeah, I guess for us in LRA, it's more like since there is a meeting, you need to do this async job before Monday. If it's totally async, there is nothing like pushing you to actually do it sooner than later.
Well, I guess I'd say I understand both those points, but I would also argue that both of them are concerning in the sense that, sure, it's practical and convenient to be able to have a 10-second conversation and get something resolved, but then you've excluded 90% of the MicroProfile community from being involved in that decisional discussion just because it was easier. And then I guess conversely as well, I would wonder whether if it requires a meeting to force you to do something for a spec, does that question whether there's any value in having the spec if the only way people are forced to do anything and think it's valuable is to have a meeting to target? And I'm not saying that those aren't all valid points. I'm just trying to take the view that if we don't pull the Band-Aid off and go full async, I don't think we're going to get there.
So can I maybe just jump in? I'm not sure whether this should be a all or nothing. I don't know if we really have to decide we only do async or only sync. It should, in my opinion, should be in a combination of it. We might also be in a situation where we go all full-blown async and we still have no participation. And it wasn't all along the issue that the meeting is at a bad time and people don't join. And then we just, shooting ourselves in the foot because we're doing things async, but actually everybody that is in the meeting every week can still make the meeting and nobody else is joining. All the async options is currently available. And as an example for GraphQL, we don't see people not in the meeting chatting away on Gitter or issues or so on. So we're basing this on a theory that suddenly people are going to start joining. I'm not convinced that that's proven.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not basing it on that. I'm just saying that might be a benefit. I would argue that being an open source, most open source communities that I'm aware of don't have regular meetings for stuff, at least at the frequency that we do. Everything's done asynchronous.
Yeah, I would say it would be a really nice exercise for LRA. I'm not saying that we are not doing things async. It's mostly on meeting we are discussing stuff that is not resolvable on GitHub issues or in emails or Gitter.
I think when you do have the live meetings, very often there is no real tracking or tracing on what's happening. I mean, we try to have an agenda and update the agenda and write our stuff in it. But if you have a technical discussion, be it on Gitter or in issues, then you have a much better tracking of what's going on and how you came to a conclusion, which may be a value in itself. So when you have decided for something, you can still go to the history of how you ended up with that, which may help people a lot understanding why something is done in a certain way. That is certainly an advance.
There is also option to record Hangouts.
Yeah, but I mean, if you don't have time for 10 hours live, being present live, I also don't have time to watch 10 hours of Hangouts.
Right.
I have so many things where I think I should watch that and never do because I don't have the time.
Come on, give up the game. Game of Thrones is almost over, right? You don't have to binge watch anymore. Okay, that was a bad joke. But from my perspective, I tend to, with the exception of this Hangout, right? I tend to attend opportunistically. The architecture one, I started to attend more regularly, but it's only once a month. If I had to do the architecture one every week, like some of the specs meet every week, it'd be a lot harder, especially multiplied by the number of specs that we have. The other thing is, some specs, especially the reactive ones, were, my time, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. It makes it more difficult. Sure, I can go back and watch, or I can read the meeting minutes. But to Ken's point, the most open source projects live on mailing lists, right? We don't really, I think with most open source projects, do live calls. It might be interesting for a couple specs to go completely async, right? And maybe we take a couple of volunteer specs and kind of come back with, well, this is how things changed, right? Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, try and just go completely async and just see what happens.
Well, I'm kind of wondering, does it have to be that cold turkey? I mean, we make a lot of progress on these calls that we have every other week. So even if these, if the spec calls, I don't know if you want to do it every other week or maybe once a month, just to kind of get back, touch base, and in between do the async communications via the emails and stuff. Maybe that would be a compromise.
Yeah, from my perspective, I would be giving it a shot, but I cannot say for whole spec team.
Anyone from the community have other views?
Yeah, if I may defend my thoughts, I only attend the generic one because I think it's most useful for me as an outsider. But the one time I thought of having a discussion with metrics because I was running into a problem at my project. The first thing I did was checking when the metrics call would be to see if I could join there and ask my question. In the end, it turned out to be a Pajara issue, so I didn't have to. But for me, as an outsider, it's one point to get into the specs when I don't know how to get in there for my how do you say it? From a point I don't know where to begin.
So that's Edwin. Did you find that that's I don't know if that's intimidating or if just in general that you'd rather, because I think there is the forum and there are Git issues that you can use. I'm not trying to say that to say that that's the only place that you could do it. I'm just wondering, are the calls at a bad time or? Oh
no, yeah, but what you're saying is absolutely right. I could have gone there, but for some reason the calls that were up were the first thing that came to thought to get into the.
As a way to talk to the people that are actually talking about the spec, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is we actually have a Gitter set up. We have issues that we look at regularly. We have the forum, and yet we still, out of all those choices, we collect up issues that we want to talk about for the next Tuesday, and we have an agenda, and we talk through the issues just because it's expedient, I guess.
Yep.
Which I appreciate what we're trying to fix here, which is, how do we make this visible to anybody who wants to participate? I just know what the alternative to calls is, and that's, I've already got 20 Slack groups that I ignore. It's easier to ignore a Slack group than it is to ignore a phone call that you're on.
I think from my perspective again, when I need input on a project, I think I should go to the GitHub page, and having these calls planned is more of a luxury than what is common. So I think if they are going to be removed, I don't think it's a problem for me getting help from the project when needed, because the GitHub project is there, of course. But these calls are a luxury. That's how I look at it.
That makes sense.
So I don't know if we've necessarily come to any kind of conclusion here. I mean, there's discussion. I think I heard, was it LRA? Maybe someone talking about, well, let's try and reduce the frequency and go more async and just try it. I can't remember which spec it was.
Well, that was me, but I cannot say for spec because there are like more people.
No.
But I can propose it on the next Hangout.
And Ken, did you also start a Google group thread on this at all, out of curiosity?
I haven't yet, no.
That might be another interesting place to continue this discussion. So
Well,
it might expedite the discussion.
Let me rephrase. I started a thread in October about there being too many meetings, and I was basically shot down as that's not the case. But I can start another one.
Or continue the existing one, saying, you know, now we have more specs and we have more specs coming. You know, can we really afford, for some, this isn't an issue for everybody, right? Not everybody's on a lot of specs, but some people are on an awful lot of specs, right? And I definitely feel for those individuals.
Yep. I mean, you know, if you look at the MicroProfile calendar, it's amazing how busy that thing is.
Agree. I mean, from my perspective, I don't think any, you know, there can be like a vote on this call or any other call telling individual spec teams what they should do, right? You know, or what it's going to be up to the individual teams, spec teams to figure it out. But I do think it can consume an awful lot of time for, I think, some pretty key individuals that are involved in a lot of specs. So I definitely understand, you know, where Ken is coming from. You know, I know Emily's on a lot of specs, right, as well, right? Just a ton of specs. So, and there's others.
I'll raise it in the Google group thread.
Yeah, I do think it's actually a good idea to maybe reduce the frequency at a minimum to keep the active individuals active. But yeah.
Just a last point. How is changing the way of communicating giving you more time? You're still going to have to read and write quite a lot now. You're just not going to talk a lot. You're still going to have, if you're on all the specifications, you're just going to have a different format of communicating it. I don't know how you suddenly buy time then.
It's easier to dip in and out of things across the days when you don't have scheduled calls all the time.
Also for those of us that work with peers in a different time zone, like myself in Europe and most Red Hatters or many Red Hatters in the US, there is a narrow window between my 2 p.m. and my 6 p.m. where we have all the meetings in one go. So the internal ones and also the MicroProfile ones, not having these meetings or has some less also makes it easier to find time.
But you still have the option currently to dip in and out of it, because there's meeting notes, there's Gitter, there's issues. So all the asynchronous options is there currently.
Yes,
right. But the issue is that not all specifications maintain their agenda and minutes the same way.
But let's solve that issue then.
But frankly, then you're still excluding people from decisions. Unless everything you do in a meeting is then subsequently done in a GitHub issue, there is things happening in a meeting that not everyone is access to.
Yeah, so it should be possible to then drop the meeting minutes and then basically use issues as your meeting minutes. So it feels like it could be a process change. And I agree that there's a lot of meetings, and I think the meeting should reduce. I don't know if we should just stop it immediately and just go async. It feels like a knee-jerk reaction.
Well, for those of us that have been doing this for 2 years, it's certainly not knee-jerk. As I said, I'll raise it again on the Google group, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. I definitely kind of feel for the folks that have to join a lot of calls. And I guess kind of an action item is for the various folks on the call who attend spec meetings to bring it up in each of the spec meetings, spec groups, to have this conversation.
Yeah, that's a very good point, John. It may not apply to every group, but if it can be cut back on some of the components, then it will help the overall impact on those people that participate in many or most of them.
I think we need to be cautious there, though, because we don't want to be in a situation where every spec does something slightly differently, and then we've got all these different rules about where things happen, so it makes it very hard for people to contribute across multiple specs. I think within reason, we need to have a single policy for all specs at the umbrella level down. Now, what that policy is, I don't know. But I think if we start letting specs nuance too much what they do, then it's just going to make community involvement even more difficult.
Well, yeah, I can see that viewpoint. I guess I'm just thinking that depending on where a component is in their life cycle, they may require calls, and that would be out of the norm, and then maybe they would discontinue them after they get past the issue or hurdle.
Right, but allowing a spec to have more frequent, or having calls or more frequent calls up until they have their first 1.0 is very different than saying every spec can do what they want.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think this topic is going to be difficult to come to a consensus on, because there's lots of varying views, but I still think it's worth, folks to bring it up in their spec calls, and to maybe reference the thread that Ken kind of posts. So Ken, you could either choose to create a new thread or continue the old one on this topic. And point the spec teams to that thread, and let's have a really good discussion on that. And if it does come down to some kind of formalized process about how we want to do things, then we are going to have to write that up. So I guess that's all I really have.
And this would only apply to spec meetings, right? Because we have weekly MicroProfile starter meetings. And that's a project that is changing, has a lot of fluidity. We're, working on new features, all the time.
Frankly, I would almost say starter would fall in the same boat. It's another spec.
So I'm kind of on the same boat as Martin. Going back to the comment he made that, it's that Monday morning meeting is kind of a deadline, where, you need to get done what you were supposed to get done. So it kind of sets the cadence. for all the members. I mean, things get done obviously during the week also, but that Monday meeting is like, you need to get all your ducks in a row and everything that you want to bring to the table for discussion ready.
I mean, if there has to be a forcing function, that forcing function could be, a mandatory status email every Monday morning or something like that, right? That it accomplishes a similar forcing function, but in a different manner.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I'll raise it in the group. I'll just finish by saying I don't think meeting time-based sprints is something we want to continue doing.
I will bring this up in LRA. I would be actually interested, like for 3 weeks, to drop the Hangouts and see how it goes.
And maybe try something like everyone has to give their status by Monday morning, into the group or something like that, right? Some kind of forcing function. Okay.
Yeah, the spec meetings are usually 1 hour, right? Because,
typically.
The MicroProfile starter meeting is 30 minutes, so it could be even shorter sometimes. So we're done early, we finish early. So
I'd like to exempt this call.
Oh no, this call has to be canceled. What do you mean extensions?
So, technically this call was really supposed to be a status call, but I think we're just finding lots of value in having these discussions, right? And normally I wouldn't let this discussion go quite this long, but it really depends on the agenda, right? We kind of have a light agenda today, so it was actually really well worth having a lot of this discussion here. So this is no longer really just a status call. It really has become more of a let's process things, forward, and in addition to status, right? Like what Kevin did. Okay. All right, I'm gonna move on if that's okay. All right, Kevin, you're up.
Oh, my next? Okay.
Yep.
So many of you are probably involved in these Jakarta discussions, related to the name change from JavaX to Jakarta. Some of that discussion that's coming up is, okay, what's the relationship between Jakarta and MicroProfile? Well, one of the things that Mike Milinkovic from the Eclipse Foundation has been, talking to me about, but then he's been, kind of public with this stand as well, is that the Eclipse can really only support one specification process. And one thing that came out during that exercise of developing the specification process is that the process that we're using for MicroProfile just doesn't cut it from a legal and IP flow type viewpoint. They have found some problems, potential problems, I should say, with the way that we're developing specifications and how the IP would flow to all the participants and any implementers of the specifications. So what he would like to do is come to one of our community hangouts and bring up this topic, talk to it, and allow any of us to fire questions at him. I've talked to him at a couple of conferences. I talked to him last week again at Red Hat Summit. He has convinced me that we need to do something for MicroProfile. And what we exactly do, that's still up in the air, but I really do think we need to have this conversation in the MicroProfile community and get that started to figure out what are we going to do to going forward with our specifications in the process. So what I wanted to do is throw this out today. Looking at Mike's calendar, he is available on May 28th. So that would be our next community hangout. We could allocate, 20, 30 minutes for this discussion. And I wanted to bring that up to see if the community thought that would be a good idea.
Do you remember what the exact problem was? Or the main problem?
Well, I am not a lawyer, so it's really difficult for me to really understand all the details on this. But it does have to do with when does the granting of any IP that's been contributed to the specifications, so when does that get granted to the implementers of the specifications? And right now we don't have that defined as part of our MicroProfile process. And that's something that they had to struggle with when defining it for the overall Eclipse Foundation process and then the one for Jakarta specification process. And this is something that, you know, the legal teams that were involved, I know, you know, of course, Oracle and Eclipse, because of the Eclipse Foundation, with them working with other organizations, some of IBM Legal and Red Hat Legal were also involved in the discussion. And I think everybody is pretty much in sync that, yes, something needs to be done for MicroProfile.
So the way I understand it, Mark, I think Mark, it was you that asked the question, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so the way I understand it is that they would like MicroProfile to follow or have or adopt a formal specification process. So whether it's the Eclipse Foundation one, or the Jakarta one, or some other one, that's the way, the imperative, you know, the way I understood it. Is that the way you understood it, Kevin?
Yeah, there be some flavor of the Eclipse specification process, and that's the part that we, you know, need to figure out. I even there's a discussion going on, and I know the way that I paraphrased it. The first time Mike read it, he agreed with me, and then the next time he read it, he didn't agree with my assessment. So, you know, it's one, I don't know, it's kind of a.
Okay, they want us to apply to some specification process. This is the first thing.
Yep.
This is a processual thing. The second part is the legal thing, because, you know, if you add something to the Eclipse license or you add something to the Apache license, it's not the Eclipse license anymore. It's not the Apache license anymore. So I wonder, I mean, I'm legally trained. I've studied this thing. So the question is what they would love to add in the final IP in the license. Yes. Because, you know, at the end, if they add something, then it's not this license anymore.
Yeah. So Mark, you are right on. There was a modification to it was some participation agreement that needed to be executed in order to participate in the specification projects, which would then allow for the IP to flow. So you're right. It would be an additional agreement of some sort that our participants would have to sign.
And if you're part of an organization and your organization may have already signed that on our behalves, right?
Right.
But yeah, individuals actually would have to go back and accept that updated license.
Oh, that's completely something different, because who owns the IP? I mean, you can always hand over the IP you own yourself or you have control over. And even if you're working at for example, if IBM does something on ours for their customers, they don't own the IP. So this even applies to IBM or to Red Hat as well. If you do your customer arm, your consulting arm does something for the customers, you don't own the IP. Your customer might own the IP. So it's not something you can handle just with a company contributor license or company contributor agreement. You have to be aware who owns the IP, and only the IP you own yourself or your company owns can be handed over.
Yep.
So my recommendation, I'll be honest here. I think we first have to hear Mike and understand his concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what needs to be tracked and how it needs to be tracked, and then we can compare that to how we do things and figure out where potential gaps are. But I think kind of right now it's a little bit too much speculation.
Yes.
And we should hear what Mike has to say first.
Yeah.
And the question on the floor is, do we do this in 2 weeks and allot time out of our normal meeting to do that, right? Which is 30 minutes.
And I would definitely encourage Mark. I mean, you're legally trained on this, and to bring your questions to Mike. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Mike will be able to answer them without a lawyer, but you know, it's gonna be good discussion.
That's the reason why I asked if there is something kind of written down where kind of lawyers went forth and back.
No. But now, if you want, Mark, the one thing I would suggest is that you could review the Eclipse Foundation specification process. That is documented,
Yes.
and you know that's where I would point everybody at. But I know a lot of people have been asking Mike for, you know, more detail on the, you know, all these discussions with Oracle, and he has just said no, not going to get that.
Could you please add a link to it into the minutes? That would be really helpful.
Yes,
Thanks a lot.
I will do that.
Yeah, there are also some presentations from last year's EclipseCon Europe about this new Eclipse specification process, which they have created for Jakarta use at that point in time because there was nothing matching. It's an extension of their previous whatever process. And I guess they just want us to follow that so that they only have one specification process for all their specifications under the Eclipse Foundation and not many.
Oh gosh, sorry folks, there's something completely stupid bubbling up. We are not a specifications project. We said our body.
I know.
So that's our self-definition.
But that's the other part of this question.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry for always asking those nasty questions.
So that's an excellent point, a valid point. Yeah. So are we okay with setting aside some time next week, 30 minutes or so, 20 or 30 minutes for Mike, and then we can add Q&A. I suspect it may go longer, to be honest, so it may punt some other things that we might want to talk about, but this is, I think, a critical discussion for us to have.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, we got one agreement. I think we're good.
That's a consensus today at this point. Okay.
I will get Mike formally invited, and then after today's call, I'll update the agenda to make sure that we block off the first 20 to 30 minutes just for this.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Kevin. I thought I would just cover a couple of topics very briefly. Didn't want to really spend a lot of time on this. Just talking about where we're at with MicroProfile from a couple of data points I've seen basically within the last week. The first is Ken, myself, and Kevin, along with Mark Little, were kind of hosting a session at Red Hat Summit just on the roadmap for MicroProfile and Jakarta EE. And okay, EAP was in there, but that's not relevant for this. And normally at a company conference like Red Hat Summit, you don't get a lot of developers, you get a lot of managers in these kind of roadmap sessions. But we hit roughly, Kevin and I were kind of eyeballing it, around 50 attendees, and the amount of awareness of both Jakarta and MicroProfile was super high, right? Probably 85% of the people or something raised their hands when we asked about it. Right. So, and there was a lot of interest in, we had some, I won't cover it here, but some questions around the JavaX namespace and various opinions were kind of covered there. And that's a different discussion than MicroProfile for now. But my point is that awareness is really high, and that ties into the next bullet with the Jakarta EE developer survey. And take a look at that, because there's a couple of slides in there that just says the awareness of MicroProfile and the adoption of MicroProfile is really high. So last year, I think it was 13% were using MicroProfile, and what was it this time around, like 28% for doing microservices development. So we more than doubled over last year. So a couple of really good data points for MicroProfile and all the efforts that everyone here and beyond are putting into MicroProfile. So I just thought I'd bring those up. Any comments around either of those? Okay. But yeah, definitely take a look at that PDF link after the call.
That sounds awesome. I'll add my comment to that.
Cool.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, both the survey and the session itself. I think they both say very good things about what we're doing with MicroProfile.
Yeah, it's encouraging.
Yeah, on the Red Hat session, think of it as it's a company conference, not a developer conference. So typically, awareness of MicroProfile and Jakarta EE would be fairly low, but it really jumped up this year.
And I'll vouch for that too, because I have to speak at the IBM conferences, and it doesn't, there's not the inroads of the technology into a I'll call them marketing conference. I mean, we get fantastic traction at developer conferences, but to start making this type of inroads at the marketing conferences as well, I think is very good.
Okay, last topic. And I see Ken's actually, well, maybe not, posted the thread. Cesar, you want to cover this last one?
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
so just a second. John, you skipped over Edwin's.
Oh, I did. Oh my God. I'm so sorry, Edwin. My bad. Edwin, go for it.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much attention to it, but last Hangout there was a notion of getting new members on board and interviewing Alex to make a start with that. I just wanted to mention that Alex and I are on it, and that I have put some interview on that he can questions that he can answer, and then I will create a MicroProfile blog out of it, and yeah, that. So I wanted to notify that we're on it and that it's going.
And just to add to that, I'll be putting in those responses this week.
Okay, great.
And what's going to be the venue for is this going to be become a blog post in the MicroProfile blog, or is this just for us as MicroProfile members to understand how?
Nope, it'll be a blog post.
That
was the idea of it.
Okay, I couldn't quite remember. Okay, cool. All right. I will definitely take a look at that. Edwin, sorry about that. Didn't mean to jump over you.
No problem.
Okay, so now Cesar.
And you are on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, hello.
Can you hear us?
Hold. Can you? Hello, can you hear me?
request.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay,
yes.
good.
Okay,
thank you. You were being quiet on purpose, huh?
No.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I'm heading to the dentist. I have a 3 o'clock, so I'm in my car now. Just wanted to, with the announcement of the JavaX issue with Jakarta EE, there's been a lot of talk, in the community and discussion about MicroProfile with respect to Jakarta EE and how this is going to affect MicroProfile and what's the future of MicroProfile. I've seen some informal surveys done by some folks, showing Twitter results and things like that, and showing, more than 50% of people, they want MicroProfile to be part of Jakarta EE and all this, all these metrics. And I was just wondering if, to avoid confusion and to, put some clarity into the whole, discussion, I was wondering if Kevin or John or you guys could author a blog post you know, speaking for, you know, on behalf of the MicroProfile community, you know, saying, you know, to formally, you know, explain what our position is, you know, whether we have one or not at this point.
Yeah, so my initial take is that I don't know if we could come to a consensus on what the what the stand is.
Yeah, but even saying that, I think that would give clarity. Like saying that, you know, it's too early for the community to say yes or no.
And that, yes, that I would firmly
You know what I
get
mean?
behind.
Yeah.
Yep.
Instead of people here and there just claiming things and, you know, giving the impression that you know, of what the future is gonna be for this project.
Yeah, there's definitely no shortage of opinions on like the Jakarta platform mailing list, dev list, which is it's not a bad thing, by the way. There's lots of
Right.
active discussion going on about the, you know, how to evolve Jakarta EE, how to deal with the JavaX namespace issue. MicroProfile is getting pulled into some of those threads, or, you know, sub threads. So that's all goodness. But I agree with Kevin. I don't think we can have any formal stance from a MicroProfile community unless we as a MicroProfile community have that conversation, right, and come to a consensus about what we think our stance is collectively.
Well,
So,
unless we do what we just talked about, is saying that we don't have a consensus yet.
yeah, and it's probably worth even saying that we haven't really had a strong discussion on it, because let's see how the discussion falls out, and, you know, let's see what consensus begins to form in that other thread, the Jakarta EE JavaX thread, if there's any, and then maybe we can have a discussion. I don't know. That's kind of my feeling.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, like, there's a lot to be decided still for Jakarta EE with respect to, you know, they talk about the Big Bang approach or the phased approach to, you know, to evolve away from the JavaX namespace. That all needs to, in my mind, that all needs to be settled down first or decided upon. And at that point, sometime in the future, I think it would make sense to have the discussion about MicroProfile, you know.
Let me allow to disagree.
Yeah.
I think we should think about it very early on, because we're moving a whole ecosystem, and kind of the end users are just the last one there. So we first have to move the containers, the singular applications, but also libraries which they use, like, for example, Achillean or whatever. And there are quite a few layers on top of it, JPA providers, Delta Spike, and so on. And MicroProfile is part of this story. And only then the users can move. So we must not be the last one in the chain, but we are kind of one of the first projects which move or need to move. So I'd suggest that we kind of have two versions in parallel. One which is kind of tailored for the old JavaX package names, and another one for the new Jakarta packages.
So I look at this in two separate kind of threads. One is, we're going to have to adopt the JavaX namespace in MicroProfile, right, for the Java EE based specs that we have. So the question is, whenever that happens, how that decision is made within the Jakarta EE community, right, whether it's the Big Bang or not, that part is going to impact us. The other parts of the thread, so in that sense, I fully agree, right? We're going to have to be a part of maybe that conversation, and because that will impact potentially our specs and stuff here. Where there's a separate discussion going on about, should the projects be separate? Should they fold together? That kind of a discussion, I think, is a separate discussion. And that's one that's going to be, I think, a longer discussion. So that's my perspective, because I've got some pretty strong thoughts, although I don't represent, Red Hat necessarily on this, and I definitely don't represent MicroProfile. I'm just one thought. So, all right. So, how do we summarize this discussion then? I think Cesar's about to hit the dentist here. You can feel free to go on mute when you start screaming, Cesar. So,
Yeah.
You know, should we have a blog post just about boy, you know what? We've only
I
got
think a blog post is, I mean, what you guys mentioned now, I mean, it will give the community insight into where we are at this point. And, you know, it will be the official position that folks in the community just running serves here and the questioners there and posting results as to the future. I think just summarizing what you just said, all of you said, will be a good blog post.
I think we are conflating two different topics here. The one is the relation between Jakarta and MicroProfile, which has been discussed ever since, basically. And the second is the effect the JavaX to Jakarta impact has on MicroProfile. And we should not kind of mix these two things.
Yeah, it is.
I thought that's what I just said. Maybe I wasn't nearly as concise as Mark. I agree with you, Mark.
You don't have the lawyer training, John.
No.
No.
So, Mark, we're
never
definitely
practiced
But even
anything.
but even a blog post about that, the Mark's point, yeah, you know, these two are two separate things. Just spelling that out in a blog post, I think it's good.
So, who wants to take a crack at? I mean, we could do it in a Google Doc, right? Just collaborate on it and then post it. I don't know, sometime later this week or something. Anyone want to take a first shot at doing that?
If no one else volunteers, I will.
That's what I was going to say.
What, you were going to volunteer me?
If no one else was going to volunteer, I would.
Oh.
So, I will take I'll start the doc. I'll step up. I'll start the doc. It'll be collaboration, right? So, and I'll push that into the Google group as a thread.
Yeah, that's great because I might like to add some thoughts as well there. So that would be great.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay. 2 minutes to go. Any last thoughts before I drop off? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Same bat time, same bat channel in 2 weeks. And don't forget, we're going to basically take up to half the meeting or so going over the IP flow discussion with Mike.
Yep.
So thanks everyone for joining.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank
all.
you.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon and goodbye. Ciao.